Welcome back, my lords and ladies, to the Cast Beyond the Wall. We are your guides to all things Westerosi still. And we are here to bring you a review, analysis, and a fan v fan debate on each episode of HBO's Game of Thrones successor series, as George R. R. Martin likes to call it, House of the Dragon. Today, we're going to talk about House of the Dragon, what you can expect from the new series, how we're feeling about it, along with a few other housekeeping announcements about how the new season of the Cast Beyond the Wall is going to play out. Now, if you're a longtime listener, welcome back. Much like Jon Snow, you just can't keep a good secret Targaryen down. And if you're tuning in for the first time, one, congratulations, you found us. And number two, welcome to what has been described by the internet as the show that is just hanging out with your smart buddies, talking about Game of Thrones. Thank you, Apple Podcast Reviews. Or as I like to call it, the Dance of Dueling Dragonites. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and in the truest sense of what is dead may never die, I've awakened this podcast from its 3-year slumber to determine whether or not there's still life left in this Westerosi fantasy. But I couldn't do it alone. Ladies and gentlemen, rejoining me are my co-hosts from the previous seasons. First up, we have, he's still in the Dornish lands of Arizona. Sir, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Austin Lucari. Sorry, everyone, we've been gone so long. Just been doing, a lot of traveling, going to concerts, and engaging in like really large group activities with tons of people in close quarters. Just enjoying life the past couple of years.
Austin, you know what they say about close quarters weapons, right?
Close quarters weapons. Yeah, I'll put on my mask. It was. It's been a couple of years, everyone. Right? Like it's been rough.
In some ways, it feels like it's been no time, but also infinite time, all at the same time.
Yeah, it's
very wild. All right. Well, Austin Lucari, welcome back to the show. My brother-in-law living out the dream of the Dornish lands, though masked up appropriately, sir. Thank you. Also joining us from, I don't even know, Daniel, how to describe what lands you're. It was the Starkish lands of Kentucky, but you don't live there anymore. Maybe it's more like you're not in the mountains.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Daniel Stull, and I am so glad to be back. It's been quite a long time. I've moved twice since the last time we recorded. But yes, you now close to St. Louis here in Illinois, and I've really missed this podcast and getting to hang out with you guys and talk. So I am just, if anything, I'm just really excited to have this time back to be recording and talking about something Game of Thrones. So yeah, I'm excited.
Excellent. Well, Daniel, I'm so glad that you're here. And I think it's a great segue because we have a few announcements we need to address here first. But I think the biggest one is, as you acknowledged and Austin acknowledged, it's been a while. Life has happened. A global pandemic has happened. We have a new president in office. There's been 3 seasons of Westworld that have come out between now and then. I can't get over all the changes. It's like I said, in some ways it feels like we've lived out entire lives since this show concluded 3.5 years ago in 2019. In other ways, it feels like we were just sitting around the table here in Oklahoma City saying, and now our watch has ended. Now, again, I think this is a good time to talk about how this season of the Cast Beyond the Wall is going to be something of a transition year for the podcast. Not only are we covering the new series, House of the Dragon, but we should also acknowledge that with the 3.5 years that have passed, all of us have personal updates to share with you. So Daniel has moved a couple of times. Austin, I think we need to acknowledge here that you're going to be stepping away from the series as one of our main hosts and will instead be joining us a couple of times throughout the season as a guest. And I just have one question for you. What sort of treachery is this? You're bailishing me here. You got a knife to my throat? You said don't trust me, and I trusted you, and here we are. What's going on?
Oh, look, my watch has ended, Caleb. It's over for me. No, we had 2 kids in the time period that I was off, and they are requiring quite a bit of attention, as you might imagine. Great kids, super healthy, awesome, love them, and enjoying every minute get to spend with them.
Excellent. Well, that's great news. I guess that checks out. I think, Tywin Lannister would support your decision to, put family first. Family
legacy. It's all about the family, right? building my own house.
Exactly. Build your own house. But I'm thankful we will, hopefully at least once, maybe twice or more, I'll be able to talk with you about the series throughout this season. But with that said, I also want to acknowledge a couple other things. Firstly, we are taking a bit of a wait and see approach, not only to House of the Dragon, but also, for those of you who are fans of fantasy television, the Rings of Power, Lord of the Rings series that's going to be on Amazon Prime. The series is set to debut on the streaming service on Friday, September 2nd. I think it's kind of fun, actually. It's going to be going head to head with House of the Dragon. We used to joke about, Lord of the Rings versus Game of Thrones back in the day, but now we're going to get to see it in action. Won't be quite the same as original Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, but still, it's a real battle of the bastards here. It's Middle-earth versus Westeros. It's Tolkien versus Martin, and perhaps, maybe even bright, uplifting fantasy versus more subversive dark fantasy, although the Rings of Power trailer has me questioning that even. So I actually want to stop and talk about Rings of Power for a second. Again, listeners want to know, we are going to be talking about Game of Thrones for the majority of today's conversation, but what do you think about these two series airing at the same time? And Daniel Stull, I'll start with you.
I'm actually pretty excited. I think that, as you mentioned, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones are vastly different worlds. And so I'm actually really excited to have them kind of both on the same time, so I can, it's not going to feel like they're both fantasy, so I guess in some senses they're competing, but they're so drastically different, at least based on the content that we've seen so far, in the types of where, Lord of the Rings tends to be a little more traditional, a little more like clearly good versus clearly bad, whereas Game of Thrones has that dark gray, everybody's bad, everybody's good sort of feel to it. So I'm excited to have both of those experiences happening at the same time, so I don't feel like I'm getting two like bleak worlds at the same time. But it'll be fun to sort of just compare and contrast, see how they feel. And I love fantasy. It's probably my favorite genre. I'm mostly just excited in seeing how these two stories play out in, 2022, these two different huge pieces of literature.
All right. So I think that is an interesting take. One thing I'm going to pass it to you, Austin, here in a second. But one thing I want to note here is that I want to say the original Game of Thrones season 1, it was a $60 million budgeted television show, which I think it came out to, it was $6 million an episode, roughly. I need to go back and verify the numbers so listeners don't shout at me if I got a few decimals wrong there. How much do you guys think Rings of Power season 1 costs? So $60 million for Game of Thrones in 2011.
Isn't it like 120 or something crazy? It's nuts. It higher even?
Wow,
Dang.
I didn't realize it was that much.
I knew it was really expensive. I'm here for it. Honestly, you're going to compare it to the movies, right? The original trilogy with Peter Jackson, of course. What Peter Jackson pulled off with that original trilogy was absolutely insane. I don't think it's going to come anywhere near the same level of quality.
Even though the budget is probably like 4 times higher than the movies.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna happen. So what was it, like 300?
So, firstly, I want to point out it was estimated to be worth $1 billion no, that's not the budget. That is to purchase the right to make the series. Number one. According to this Forbes article I'm looking at from July of this year, it was reportedly $465 million for the first season. That is freaking absurd. That is more than the Avatar movie. That's more than any Avengers movie. It's more than any Star Wars movie by almost double. Yeah, I just say that because, Austin, your point, I'm really curious. The Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson movies, having rewatched those on 4K Ultra Blu-ray recently, look incredible. I mean, the CG is not doesn't look like it came out today, but it's pretty close.
It's really good. And I was reading a lot about how those were made and stuff. It's just kind of crazy how all the money they got up front, they made a commitment to a trilogy from the very beginning. They filmed them all at the same time, which is probably the only way that could have happened. It's just crazy. I'll put it this way. This is only going to be good if they're willing to put that same level of commitment behind it and say, you know what, this is going to be a 5-season thing. We already have this laid out. We know what this is going to be. If they can't do that, it's never going to live up to what people are already familiar with about that series, which is honestly, I think, the same problem with Game of Thrones and the new series as well. Is people already have some level of expectations, and trying to beat those expectations is going to be really, really difficult.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, because that's the thing. Like, they're not budgeting to make a really great Lord of the Rings show. They're budgeting to make a Lord of the Rings show that lives up to the 20 years worth of nostalgia for a trilogy that it arguably is the best film trilogy ever made. I would even argue that. I don't know if I'd land on it, but I think there's a really good argument for it. And then same with Game of Thrones. I guess the one thing that House of the Dragon has going for it is that the bar got lowered dramatically for Game of Thrones in the last season. But so Austin's excited about Rings of Power. I'll say this. I went through a phase where I didn't care about House of the Dragon for a while, because I think I was just fatigued given how much we put into this podcast. I didn't feel as let down by the final season as a lot of people, but I also didn't think it was a home run. So, I thought, let's just, let it be. And then, so the proposition of Rings of Power was sort of enticing because it was an alternative that looked like it had the kind of backing we were just talking about, at least financially. And they have a lot of really great talent working on it. In fact, I think one of the key talents from the Game of Thrones is actually a consultant on the Rings of Power. In my mind now, I am finally drinking the Kool-Aid again for Game of Thrones. I'm hyped back up. The buzz is good. The early buzz is positive. The trailers are great. I'm really back in. I'm really interested to see which one of these comes out on top for me personally. I think it's going to be a little different for everyone. Hopefully, we're arguing at the end of this season about which show was more awesome and not this show sucks and this one was great, or they both sucked. Let's hope that. So with all that said, while we're not going to be recapping the Rings of Power on the Cast Beyond the Wall, listeners, you can expect at least a couple of bonus discussions checking in on how that series is faring. All right, gentlemen, with all that said, anything else you want to say regarding Rings of Power before we jump into our discussion of House of the Dragon?
I'd just say real quick that I think that something that the Rings of Power does have going for it is that it's been a long time since we've had anything from that world of Lord of the Rings, whereas Game of Thrones, even though we were just talking about how it's been a while, it's been 3.5 years, it's still Game of Thrones is still a lot newer, or a lot more recent rather, in our minds. And so I feel, for me, I'm just a little bit excited to get back into a new story in the world of Middle Earth, where I'm maybe not as anxious to jump into a Westeros right now, as it's been a little bit more recent in my memory. But so I think that could help it a little bit. But yeah, either way, I'm excited to see, where both these stories go.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Well, let's go ahead and get to our discussion over what to expect in the House of the Dragon.
The dream. It was clearer than a memory. And I heard the sound of thundering hooves, splintering shields and ringing swords. And I placed my heir upon the Iron Throne. And all the dragons roared as one.
I consider the matter urgent. That of your succession.
Who else would have a claim?
The firstborn child.
Rhaenyra. No queen has ever sat the Iron Throne.
The king has an heir, Daemon Targaryen.
I will not be made to choose between my brother and my daughter.
All right, so gentlemen, let's just start by laying out exactly what we already know here. So House of the Dragon represents really a full reset for what's knowable about the story that is from the novel Fire and Blood. And again, meaning that unlike the last couple of seasons of Game of Thrones, there is actual source material to refer to with Fire and Blood. Again, this is the novel that was released in 2018, and it details the history of the Targaryens family's arrival into Westeros. And among other things, it also details the Dance of Dragons, which is something that the series is based on. So I want to keep things spoiler-free here, but what do you guys know about House of the Dragon going in? And Austin, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, similar to going into the Game of Thrones series, absolutely nothing. I honestly, when I was watching the trailers and stuff over the past couple weeks, and it's not the time period I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be kind of just prior to Game of Thrones, just prior to Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark and the whole war there. But it's much earlier, and that's about all I know.
Yeah, I think we're talking closer to the hundreds of years rather than the tens of years beforehand. Again, it's I think it's like 3 or 4 generations previous to where we are in Game of Thrones. They sort of I think the showrunner Miguel Sapochnik has sort of described it as this is like the beginning. This is the series about the beginning of the end of the Targaryen reign. We know. We haven't seen it explicitly, but we know the Targaryen reign ends with Jaime Lannister stabbing Aerys in the back. This is kind of the beginning of that process that leads to the Mad King, right? Daniel, how about you? What do you know about House of the Dragon?
Very similar to Austin. I basically know nothing. I have not read Fire and Blood. Now, I have read, the main series of the Game of Thrones books. So any sort of referential Targaryen lore or history that has come out in those books, I would have access to. But it's also been a while since I read those books, as it's continuing to be a while. So I may not have retained all of that information, and that's about all I know. So just any information that we have already sort of gained about the Targaryens in general through the books, I know. But other than that, I'm going in on a pretty clean slate on this one.
All right, clean slate's great. Once again, I can't resist, gentlemen. I need to know what's knowable. Now, here's the thing. I have not finished Fire and Blood. I'm only roughly 100 pages into it. Fire and Blood, great novel. It's got some cool illustrations in it. I would say, since the series is out, you just watch the first season, and if you're intrigued enough, you go and read Fire and Blood. But what I've reading so far is really, really good. It's sort of it is different than Game of Thrones, though. So instead of it being, sort of like a POV from several different characters, think of it more like for Lord of the Rings fans out there, more like the Silmarillion, and it's not exactly like it, but think of it as more of a historical recounting of things that happen, and you do hear it from a couple of perspectives, right? And I think
that's what I was interested in, because like it goes back to the comparison we made between the two series, is that both of them are kind of venturing into the lore aspect of these series more so than actual stories being told. So that should be largely original.
Yes. So here's what I can tell you. Here's what we know. Here's what is known. Not spoilery, but here's what I will tell you is knowable. The story will adapt the events leading up to and covering the Targaryen War of Succession, which is known as the Dance of Dragons. This is an event that has been alluded to in the Game of Thrones television series. There's even an episode named after it. And there's also the 5th novel from George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, Dance of Dragons. This is not that Dance of Dragons. This is the historical event they reference several times in the novels. So again, if you have read Fire and Blood, you know the fates of several of these characters. If you're a show watcher, and by the show watcher, I mean someone who's probably watched Game of Thrones, you know just very, very little. Just what's been alluded to in the previous series, which is a bloody civil war within House Targaryen. What is unknown is none of us really know the context of the events. So even book readers who know the fates of certain characters don't necessarily know the true events. They don't really know how those events that are written about in Fire and Blood actually occurred. And what I mean is, if you've read Game of Thrones, and then the original novel, and then you watch season 1, there are a lot of things that are the same, but you actually get a ton of other sequences or scenes that add a lot more context to what's going on. Scenes that are not in the book, right? So you get sort of what they call, I think the producers referred to as sort of the God's eye view. So Fire and Blood is, as I said, more of a historical recounting, but it is more of a, like, sort of think of it as a government document recounting. Like, this is what happened to this person. This person backstabbed this person. But what you don't know is what's driving the motivations. What are the behind the scenes things that were going on that were not in the documents? And also, I think, as even George R. R. Martin has alluded to in some interviews, like, sometimes the people who write the historical documents are kind of biased and have their own opinions, and maybe it seeps its way into the history. So there is quite a bit of, while there are things that are knowable, especially like who lives and who dies, that sort of stuff you could find out with a quick Google search. I think what's more compelling is the stuff that we don't know, the details, the character drama, what drives them. Okay, so that's a little bit more about what we're covering and what's knowable. Who's running the show? I've already mentioned Miguel Sapochnik a couple times. So House of the Dragon is one of several Game of Thrones spinoffs, actually. Martin liked to refer to them as successor shows. He does not like the term spinoff, that have been in development. I don't want to pause here before we go further into House of the Dragon. Famously, there was a pilot under the working title Bloodmoon that you may have read about if you're a Game of Thrones fan who's really engaged online, that actually cost between $30 and $35 million. It starred Naomi Watts, and it was canceled. So execs at Warner Brothers said, hey, I know we sank all this money into it, but it's not beating the mark. So they didn't put it past the pilot stage. Hilariously, upon announcing that Bloodmoon was canceled, HBO actually announced that House of the Dragon had been given a full series order. That was back in 2019. So one series had a very expensive pilot that they invested a lot of money into that was canceled. The other was like, we don't even need to see the pilot. Just do the whole series, right? Which I find kind of interesting. Miguel Sapochnik, who is the director from Game of Thrones, who directed a lot of the really acclaimed episodes of the series, Battle of the Bastards, The Winds of Winter, Hard Home. And then another producer, his name's Ryan Condal, who is a showrunner on the show Colony. They are serving as the team. They're the new Benioff and Weiss. They are the executive producers and showrunners of House of the Dragon. Another thing that's noteworthy is that House of the Dragon is an entirely new writer's room. So even though you've got, Miguel Sapochnik carrying over, most of the behind the scenes folks doing the writing and the story, new folks. So again, they really are shaking things up. Now, with that said, I want to get you guys' take on how they're running the show. What do you think about who they've chosen to carry the torch as showrunners? And Daniel, I'll turn it to you.
I think it's interesting. I'm really glad to hear that Sapochnik is in there. As you mentioned, probably some of my favorite episodes, especially Hard Home, are some of the more visceral episodes that I remember vividly in my mind as I think back to Game of Thrones. So it's nice to know that there's someone that I've enjoyed their work is on there and can kind of bridge the gap between Game of Thrones and this show. But I'm also really excited to hear there's a lot of new people. I think for me, when it comes to sequels, prequels, whatever, I am more interested in, and this is more of just a personal opinion, not everyone's going to agree with this, but I would more interested in having something new. I don't want to see an attempt to recreate Game of Thrones. I want to, even though it takes place in the same world, I would like to see very new characters, very new story, new styles, something more fresh. And so that's really actually probably the more exciting thing to me is to hear that there's a bunch of new writers and we'll just see a new, different perspective and a new style on things. So that, I'm actually really excited to hear that there's a lot of new blood in there and that there's this opportunity for something a little more fresh.
All right. So Daniel's very excited for some fresh blood. Austin, what are your opinions on fresh blood?
I'm excited about it. My only concern here is Michael seems to have been mostly involved in kind of big set piece type episodes, which is cool, but I don't think that's always where Game of Thrones is the best. Game of Thrones is often the best when Tyrion Lannister is on trial, or like in those kind of those dialogue moments more so than big flashy Michael Bay style things. That's not what Michael did. That's not what Michael Sapochnik did. Like, I don't want to compare him to Michael Bay, really. That's not fair. But his episodes were still really good. My only fear is if that's the direction that HBO is pushing the show, is to be kind of compete with Marvel more than compete with more of a drama series. I would be a little concerned there.
I think that's a reasonable concern, Austin. And I'm glad you brought this up because my understanding is that Miguel Sapochnik is really, so it's a team, right? So, and every sort of executive producer team, showrunner team, duo, they do things their own way. They kind of allocate duties. People have certain things they're good at and they handle that part and they let the other half do the other thing. When there are multiple showrunners, I think about like Carlton Cuse and Damon Lindelof on Lost, for example. Lindelof really good at the weird spirituality character writing stuff, whereas I think Cuse was more good at like figuring out how to make it like a nice structured show that lands the plane, so to speak. Lost laying the plane. So my understanding is that Sapochnik is more of the directing side of things, so he's going to be more a showrunner more from the production side, whereas Ryan Condal is supposed to be more of the writing side of things. This is just what I've read. Yet to be determined how this plays out, because I too am worried. Miguel Sapochnik is probably one of the best directors that ever worked on Game of Thrones, but his episodes were definitely the very spectacle heavy. He did The Long Night was another one that he did, which, by the way, I'm just going to stop and pause here. Long Night, guys. The 4K HDR versions are available on HBO Max. Finally, they only waited until 2 weeks after I paid $200 to get the 4K HDR Blu-rays bought in my house so I could watch them to prep for this show. It turns out, all you needed to experience The Long Night and the way it was intended, and which I will say is spectacular, but all you needed was a PS5 or a 4K Blu-ray player, an OLED TV, and a surround sound system. If you have those things, that's all you need.
That's a piece of cake. You get those at the gas station for cheap.
Yeah. So everyone who was hating on The Long Night, you guys did not experience it the way it was intended. Go sink however much money, it takes to experience it. I will say it's pretty great. At least you don't have to buy the 4K Blu-rays for $200 now. You can just go watch them on HBO Max. But yes, he directed The Long Night. Battle of the Bastards is one I think they won the Emmy for. I think that's a fair concern, Austin. And I'm curious to see how it plays out. But how it seems they've allocated duties gives me a little more comfort on that side of things. Now, it's also been reported that George R. R. Martin has been much more closely involved in the House of the Dragon, especially when it was compared to how involved he was in the last few seasons of Game of Thrones. So essentially, my understanding from interviews that he's put out, especially post Game of Thrones ending, was that season 5 and on, like Benioff and Weiss kind of looped him out of stuff. The conversations were more minimal, whereas early, Game of Thrones, he even wrote episodes of the show. So this one, I don't know if he's writing. He says he's not writing or doing any cameos for House of the Dragon. However, he has reviewed the scripts and he has reviewed early cuts of the episode that he's given his stamp of approval on. So he's much more involved, than I would say he had been previously. And hey, wouldn't you know it, the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones, when he was the most involved, I think we all agree were the strongest part of Game of Thrones, right? So Austin, I'm actually going to turn it back to you here. I mean, what does having more involvement from Martin mean to you personally? Is this a good thing, a bad thing, or does it make a difference at all?
I don't think it makes much of a difference to me. I have a hard time believing anything George R. R. Martin says at this point. The man has not been the most reliable source for his own stuff. And hilariously, probably the best piece of content he put out in the past, 5 or 6 years was a video game. And he didn't really have that much involvement in it. So I don't know what that says about his involvement with this, but I'll believe it when I see it. Listen,
George R. R. Martin, he can find no shortage of ways to torment me. I spent dozens of hours trying to not suck at Elden Ring, and I went to bed crying at least 2 or 3 nights a week, thinking, why can't I?
That's experience the same. Go to bed crying after Game of Thrones. Go to bed crying after Elden Ring.
Here we go.
He accomplished his goals.
I'm sure he handcrafted every single detail of that game, Austin. He designed the little bricks on the ground, the character models.
He learned coding. That's why he hasn't been writing any books.
He's been writing code for Elden Ring.
Yeah. He's got pages.
He might be a Game of the Year winner before he puts Winds of Winter out, which is kind of hilarious, actually. Okay, so Austin thinks it's not making much of a difference. Daniel, what about you?
Well, for me personally, I actually kind of hate it because I wish he would just write the books. But on a more serious note, it feels like that's probably just the way that the Game of Thrones ended, and a lot of people being really upset. It feels like this is probably them trying to make a safe choice and involve him as a way to sort of protect themselves a little bit and say like, hey, we got Martin's approval on all this, we're good, right? Like that. It feels like a little bit more of that type of move than anything. So honestly, for me personally, I really would just rather him go write the books. But since he's here, I kind of agree with Austin. It's probably not going to make that big of a difference in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I'll break from the group a little bit. I mean, I agree with you guys. I don't think it's really going to make a big difference. And Daniel, I think you raised a great point. I think this is definitely a PR tactic from HBO to kind of do some, what would you say, damage control from the last couple seasons of the previous show. Even though they're never. What's funny is HBO has never acknowledged that the last season wasn't great. Like that's the thing. They're never apologizing for it. But the way they're sort of presenting things and talking about things, you just kind of read between the lines. It's like, they're like, yeah, we know that not everyone loved it, but we're going to do it right this time. So I think this is a little bit of that. But I'll say, listen, the man putting his name on something means something. I think whenever he put his name on Elden Ring, everyone got crazy excited. And while I never got good enough at Elden Ring to discover any of the parts that he worked on, apparently that's amazing. From what everyone who actually out plays,
like the lore world building stuff, which is what I assumed he worked on, is great. So maybe that carries over to this. Even if he just does like world building for this, essentially a prequel, it's probably better than if he didn't.
Well, and frankly, he already did the world building. Like this is like this story, like the premise of this, the Dance of Dragons. I don't know how detailed he got, but like the notion of the Dance of Dragons, he knew about like decades ago, at this point. So I don't, he's sort of the mastermind behind it all. It's more like he says, all right, you guys are doing a good job playing in my sandbox is kind of my take from it. Versus again, the last couple of seasons of Game of Thrones where he was kind of mum's the word, especially the last two.
And I think I agree mostly with Daniel though, is it's the, do you believe he's actually super involved? Or is this just corporate speak?
Listen, Austin, George R. R. Martin likes money.
Oh, he does, yeah.
But not enough money to upgrade from DOS. That's the problem. We just got to get him there. And then maybe we'll get Winds of Winter. In fact, we haven't done this is a good time to hedge bets. This is the first time we've done a cast beyond the wall in like 3.5 years. Do you guys want to hedge bets on whether or not George R. R. Martin's going to get the next book out? I'm willing to hedge some bets. Do we think he's going to
ever
like before he's no longer with us? Any takers?
How long do you think it is before we figure out immortality?
Well, he might know some people. I mean, he's pretty famous, and people.
If we can figure out immortality in the next 10 years, then maybe.
How old is he?
I think he's late 60s, I believe. I'm actually going to Google this right now. I'm pretty sure he's like 68.
I'm not confident. Like he just came out and said he's finishing up some characters' viewpoints, and I don't like those Hot Pie chapters. Better be real good.
Hot Pie. Oh man, good old Hot Pie. I haven't thought about him in years. He is 73 years old. I was mistaken. He's even older than I thought he was. So got time.
Yeah, I'm probably not going to take that bet. I think that he doesn't seem like it's going to happen. I don't know if how close of attention you guys pay to how much attention you pay to his blog updates that he does. I feel like every time I read them, like he has to be just joking and memeing. Like they feel so ridiculous. Some of the things he said, like Austin said, he made a post earlier this week or last week about how he's about to wrap up this week a character's point of view. We have no no idea what character what that is and all that kind of stuff.
It's just a Hodor chapter, Daniel.
Yes, like it's probably like a one person chapter or something, right? So, I as much as I want that book to come out, I feel like the series for sure is not going to be finished. I do, because this isn't even the next book isn't even the last one. He's still got 2 more books to come out, but there's a chance that the next one comes out. But by that point, like, am I really going to even want to read it? Because the next one's not coming out, and it'll just be a never-ending book series, a series that never ends. Probably not. So, does it even matter if it comes out at this point? I don't know. I don't think so.
Allegedly, I think at one of those blogs at one point he wrote about how he was also writing character POV chapters from the next book, the book 7. So I'm like, are you trying to maybe he's trying to write them both simultaneously so that they come out in rapid succession? Because honestly, that is the only hope. If we have a 1% hope that both of those books come out. It is that he's writing them both at the same time, and that's why it's taking him so long.
It's one of those situations where like I don't know if I don't believe anything he says ever at all. But if one day he came out and just said nothing but like released pre-orders for the next 2 books and like has a date and everything, it'd be hilarious. Just all of a sudden they were done and he's just been trolling everybody for years.
All I'll say, Caleb, is that's some real copium you have going on over there. Because, yeah, I don't think that's what's going on.
It's never happening.
A guy can dream. Spring.
I said it before. I will eat a shoe if this next book comes out.
I'll take that bet, Austin. Oh, not the whole series. I'm not betting the whole series. I'm not that crazy. I will
don't feel that confident.
I myself will eat a shoe if he dies before book 6 comes out.
Are there any edible shoes? Are we gonna die with him? Is what's gonna happen.
We're gonna find some edible shoes, Austin. We're gonna make it happen. Okay. So listeners, you have it right here. Shoe eating.
It's what everyone's been waiting for. Hot shooting action.
YouTube's gonna love it. Austin, my only question for you before we move on is what shoe size do you wear?
Toddler 2s.
Toddler 2s. That's
because it sounds like the smallest shoe to eat.
Oh. I'm a size 12 and a half, man. So I guess I got the good end of the deal. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on, ladies and gentlemen. We've talked a little bit about the behind the scenes talent, but let's talk about some of the characters that we'll be seeing in House of the Dragon. So I'm going to go down the list really quickly. We're not going to spend a lot of time on each one. I'm going to go down the list, kind of describe a little bit about them, and then we'll kind of react to sort of the general cast. So first up, we have the actor Paddy Constantine, who's playing King Viserys Targaryen, who is the 5th king of the 7 kingdoms, known as a warm, kind, and decent man, according to the internet. Viserys was chosen by a council of lords to succeed his grandfather, Jaehaerys Targaryen, as king. All right, so he's the guy on the throne. Then we got Emma Darcy as Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, which is Viserys' firstborn child. She's a dragon rider. Ooh, get to see dragon riders, multiple of them. It's going to be great. And she expects to become the 7 Kingdoms' first queen regent. One thing I want to note here is that there is apparently 2 different versions of her. There's an older version and a younger version, which to me implies there's going to be a time jump. I honestly don't know, but we'll find out. Oh, this next one I'm so excited about, guys. So excited because we have the man, the legend, the one and only Morbin Time Matt Smith as Prince Daemon Targaryen, the heir presumptive to the Iron Throne. He is the younger brother of King Viserys, grandson to King Jaehaerys, and the uncle of Princess Rhaenyra. He is also an unrivaled warrior and an experienced dragon rider. He's probably the face that we know the most in the cast. Austin, I can just tell you want to speak up. You want to speak on behalf of It's Morbin Time, Matt Smith.
Oh, that's what I'm trying to figure out. He was in Morbius?
Oh, Austin. He was in Morbius.
Have sex, my hands are yes.
This man must have needed some cash. He's been down bad since Doctor Who.
Listen, Austin, you're not going to believe the scenes he's in Morbius. I'm going to send you a YouTube link when this is done. And I would play it for listeners, but the audio experience will not do it justice. But let's just say he needed some cash and they had him do some wicked, wicked things in that movie. I'll just put it that way.
I mean, look, his wig is wicked, wicked bad too. So maybe he still just really needs the cash.
Listen, so here's what I'll say about Matt Smith in general. He has a prolific TV career. Like, he has played in a lot of really popular TV shows. I mean, yeah, Doctor Who. Now he's in Game of Thrones. I want to say hold on. I'm forgetting another one. He's in other stuff.
Those are the 2. That's it. That's all the man's done. He was in The Crown. The Crown is very good.
The Crown. That was the other big thing. He's had a really good run on television. However, his film career, not so great. Not so great. I mean, I enjoyed watching him in Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies. And then he was in Last Night in Soho. You know, the movie wasn't the best, but he was in it.
That is a movie that I have seen advertised.
It's it's an Edgar Wright joint, and on paper it sounds amazing. Came out just being kind of okay. But anyway,
He was a Terminator?
he was in fact in Terminator Genesis, but I like to say Genesis because it's spelled.
He was a voice.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So anyway, I'm always rooting for Matt Smith, but Austin, you're not going to believe what he did, Morpheus, man. Oh man.
For the record, I like him generally. I liked him in Doctor Who quite a bit.
He was one of the best. Obviously biased. He's probably my favorite Doctor that I've seen.
He's literally the only name from this cast list that I recognize. So there's that.
Daniel, do you have any hot takes on It's Morbin Time, Matt Smith?
Yeah, I saw memes about It's Morbin Time, and that's all I know about It's Morbin Time. So not a lot of strong opinions. Just know that I apparently should not go watch that movie because it came out twice and flopped twice. So that's all I know.
Okay, sidebar, guys. I'm going to send you 2 clips. I'm going to send you a montage of what he does in Morbius. Also, I don't know whether to boo or applaud the guy who attended the House of the Dragon Comic-Con panel and gets up to the mic and he says, "My question is for Matt Smith. Matt, it's Morbin Time." And Matt Smith literally goes, "It's what?" Because It's Morbin Time is not a line from the movie, guys. I want to specify. It's a meme. Oh, it's great. Anyway.
I didn't even know that. So
incredible. We also have Olivia Cook as Lady Alicent Hightower, the daughter of Sir Otto Hightower, raised in the Red Keep and a part of the King's Inner Circle, known as the most comely woman in the 7 Kingdoms. My understanding is the Hightower is sort of the predecessor to the Tyrells.
That's what I was about to say. Is that's the first name that they'll all have been Targaryen up to this point, but Hightower is not a name that I recognize. So that was I was interested to know more about that.
Well, hence the name Highgarden, which was where the Tyrells, that was like the capital city. So this is like their predecessor, so to speak. We have Steve Toussaint, I can't say that, as Lord Corlys Veral. Oh, I'm butchering this. Velaryon. He's known as the Sea Snake. He is the head of House Velaryon. I can't wait to find out how wrong I'm saying that. And he's the most famous seafarer in Westerosi history. So Austin, he might even be able to compete with your boy Euron Greyjoy.
We'll see. He's got to have a certain amount of sleaze to him to really take that seat.
I mean, Euron Greyjoy of the show, not the books, definitely made quite the impression. So it's a hard act to follow. We got Eve Best as Princess Rhaenys. I can't even. I give up. Velaryon, dragon rider and wife of Lord Corlys, known as the Queen Who Never Was. She was once a candidate to succeed her grandfather, King Jaehaerys, as ruler of the 7 Kingdoms, but was passed over in favor of her cousin Viserys. We have Fabian Frankel, who is Sir Criston Cole, a skilled swordsman from the Dornish marches. He is the common-born son of the steward to the Lord of Blackhaven. 2 more. We got Sonia Mizuno as Mysaria, a foreign-born dancer who rose to become Prince Daemon's most trusted ally. And to round out the cast is the other guy I know of, Rhys Ifans as Sir Otto Hightower, Alicent's father, the Hand of the King. I bet he doesn't make it long in that position. He serves King Viserys and the realm. He is a bitter political rival of Prince Daemon. All right, guys. I listed it out. We already talked about Matt Smith here. Austin doesn't know the rest of the cast. Daniel Stull, what do you think of this cast of characters?
Yeah, I actually don't recognize any of the names myself. So I can get excited about seeing some new actors and actresses and seeing what they bring to the world of Game of Thrones. But also don't have, like I said, didn't have any names that I recognize. So nothing that's sticking out as super exciting either. So we'll just have to wait and see. Sort of a neutral response. Just could be good, could be bad. Don't really know much enough to go off of right now. So
listen, I think Rhys Ifans, Sir Otto Hightower, aka the Lizard from the Amazing Spider-Man, and also Spider-Man No Way Home, is in the movie. So we could have Austin. You were talking about the Marvel crossover. This is it right here, right?
I was actually just going through clicking everyone's filmography, and he's also Luna Lovegood's dad in Harry Potter.
Oh, okay.
Yes, he also plays one of the sons of the devil in Little Nicky, going way back, guys. Yes, did anyone see Little Nicky?
These are all like just kind of quickly going through the actors and actresses. These are not big names at all. Which I honestly was one of the best things about the original series is I didn't know almost anybody, hadn't seen almost anybody. I mean, Tywin Lannister was already a very famous actor, and there's several others, but most of the people were unknown and made their career on that show. So I think that's kind of exciting. I'm excited to see where they can go with it.
Yeah, outside of like Sean Bean in the first season, like it was a pretty. I didn't recognize most of the cast. I did recognize. I did recognize Robert Baratheon from the first from Game of Thrones. Can't think of his name right now, but
Mark Addy, is that it?
Yeah. I think that's his name. I recognized him from something. I don't remember what now, but other than that, it was a pretty fresh cast. So that is something that is exciting. It gives new opportunities for lesser known actors to shine, and so that can be exciting. That could. Opportunity is there for them to have some.
It certainly doesn't just because they're unknown doesn't mean it's going to be
right
like low quality or anything. Like that's what the show. One of the reasons it was great is all the actors really just kind of came together great cohesively as a cast.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I agree with you, Austin. Honestly, it's more of a selling point for me. I'm glad we have Matt Smith in here. We have like one name that I'm familiar with, but I'm not like. I mean, I've seen him in Doctor Who. I haven't seen him in The Crown. I hear he's very good. I've seen him in a few things. I like him, but he's not like he's not an actor that for me personally brings a lot of expectation, other than I feel like he's probably going to get some pretty meaty scenes just because he's probably the biggest name. But I mean, otherwise, I like that I know Olivia Cook from a couple of projects. These are all character actors that I really admire. And your point, Austin, what was great was the number of actors we discovered because of Game of Thrones. Nikolai Coster-Waldau, fantastic. I literally will watch almost anything he's in, including some very bad movies I've seen that he's in. Aidan Gillen, my boy, Littlefinger, Baelish, man, that guy is incredible. That guy was in a monologue, and I never heard of him before. And then I went and watched The Wire after Game of Thrones, and of course he was amazing in The Wire. But I think one of my favorite things about Game of Thrones was all these little character actors that you discover who are really making a name for themselves. And I feel like the same thing goes here. I think it creates a really exciting opportunity. Just, based off of the very limited information I provided about these characters, are there any of these that you're going to be gravitating towards or maybe want to get behind?
I mean, I love a good pirate, so we'll see if Lord Corlys Valerian is as cool as some of his predecessors. But
what if he ends up being more like a Samwell Tarly, though?
Well, then, off the plank with him, I guess.
You can't see, this is audio medium, but Austin still does, in fact, have the autographed photo of Samwell Tarly.
I do. I have been unable to get rid of that cursed object.
Yeah, I was going to say, Austin, you're going to have to find your new character to just utterly hate with everything. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Don't worry. If Barton really is involved, I'm sure he'll write himself into it somewhere.
Daniel, bring this home. Who are you invested in here?
So there's two that stuck out to me as I was reading through. First, just like Austin, just if you have the name the Sea Snake, I'm automatically going to be a little bit interested in why that name is there. So that was interesting. But then the other one that stuck out to me was just Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen. Seems like she's going to have a pretty important role, and obviously we know about Queen Targaryens from our Game of Thrones. So it seems like there may be some sort of like connection or family connection that they might be making there. So I'm interested to see what happens with that, especially knowing that she is hoping to become the first Queen Regent. Obviously, we know how Game of Thrones ended when a Targaryen queen was trying to come to power. So it'll be interesting I think that character will be interesting to pay attention to see how they draw any connections between those two characters.
Yeah, I think of the cast, she seems the one that's the most Daenerys-esque. I mean, probably unfair comparisons. Oh, she's a Targaryen woman. She's a young woman with blonde hair that rides dragons. Okay, so I guess the comparison's obvious. But she sounds, from what I've seen in the promos they've put out in this little description, she's very ambitious like Daenerys and has that sort of like fierce attitude, that we expect to see. So she seems like the closest analog we have to that, although I'm sure she's going to have her entire upbringing is wildly different growing up in royalty. So I'm excited to see what we find from her. I actually am very excited about Rhys Ifans as Sir Otto Hightower, lizard or no lizard. Here's what I think. I really just want us to get a hand of the king who's like just straight up kind of evil and like stirring the pot. Because you got to think we had Ned Stark, who was, honorable man. And then what we had after that, I mean, I guess Tywin Lannister. I mean, you had Tyrion, who was generally a good guy. I mean, he was noble. His goal was to preserve the citizens of Westeros in order to preserve his own interests. And then you had Tywin Lannister that was hand of the king and self-motivated, but he wasn't like really stirring the pot. He was more about law and order. So I'm kind of hoping, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I'm kind of hoping this is one of those guys that's more of a Baelish who like leans in and whispers things in people's ears, that kind of stirs up the pot and drives sort of the Civil War. Just my take. I could be wildly off base, but it's a type of hand that we haven't seen yet. I don't know if that's the hand he'll be, but I hope he is. All right. So just a couple of other quick notes about the production before we start to wrap up. First up, great news. The Emmy-winning Game of Thrones composer Ramin Djawadi will return to Westeros to score House of the Dragon. He's been doing tons of stuff on HBO. He just wrapped up Westworld season 4, so no surprises there. But it is good to know because that man composed some really iconic music, not just the theme of Game of Thrones, but I think about the Light of the Seven, which was the song that played as Cersei literally blew up all her enemies in one fell swoop. And we also had, I can't remember the name of the song, but it's the music that played whenever the Night King kind of swept in and was about to take Bran. Really good, really great scoring there. So I'm excited about that. And just one thing I want to note is while I wouldn't expect any returning characters at all, I do think that we'll be able to expect to see returning props. So one that's already popped up in some of the promo materials is the Valyrian steel dagger, the one that Arya, used to kill the Night King. We're also going to see more familiar locations like Dragonstone, for example, and also King's Landing. Those I'm pretty confident are going to make an appearance this season. So I just want to turn it back to you guys. I mean, is there any other crossovers, Easter eggs, or areas of the lore that you'd love to see in House of the Dragon? Austin, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I can think of a returning character, potentially. There is one character I can think of in particular that was probably alive during this time period.
Okay,
Can you think of it?
Is it
Melisandre was likely alive.
Ooh, that's a good one.
She's like 400 years old when she dies in Game of Thrones.
Yep.
So she very likely could be alive during this time period.
The Red Woman, that could be pretty cool, actually.
So anyway, that would be neat. And then other than that, there's like aspects of the world I don't feel like we ever really got enough information on, like the Children of the Forest. I don't know if they'll show up. They might not go that direction at all, but it would be interesting.
I am going to say, Austin, could be wrong, and maybe this is part of, I think that I read somewhere that they had like 4 seasons mapped out of the show, assuming the first season's a hit. I want to say, though, the Children of the Forest was a part of that other pilot that got canned, the one that was called Bloodmoon. It was supposed to cover the original long night that happened over 1,000 years ago before there were 7 kingdoms or whatnot. And my understanding was the Children of the Forest were supposed to be an integral part of that series. That said, that doesn't mean they won't show up, especially the longer the series.
Could reuse some of the footage potentially. Who knows?
They got to salvage that $30 million budget. Daniel, how about you? Anything else you're missing out on, or you want to see?
So as we were going through, at the end of the day, I think the Tyrells probably ended up being my favorite house by the end of everything. So as we discussed, sounds like they're not the Tyrells yet. So I would be really interested to just get some little, not a big, large focus of the show, but just some little tidbits on how the Tyrells come into their formal, proper house as we know them in the Game of Thrones time. I think that could be like an interesting little, like, it could just be a quick scene here or there that sort of helps bring that into understanding, because they were probably my favorite house. So to see no Tyrells on there is always something I'd be interested to see more of. Why aren't the Tyrells as influential right now in this time frame, and how do they become so influential by the time that the time frame from Game of Thrones? So.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. And not just that, for me, it's not just the Tyrells. It's also seeing just how all the other families, where they're at in their respective histories. Because here's the thing about the Lannisters, for example. Tywin was the one who built that house up, because before him, his dad was literally a joke, like a laughing stock. They didn't take the Lannisters very seriously. And then obviously we know a little bit about the history of the Stark family. So I am interested to see which of those houses come into the fold and how they are presented, and kind of what their dynamics and their relationships with the Targaryens are. So that's definitely pretty intriguing to me. I'll tell you another thing that I'm really interested to see if they touch on. This is definitely more lore focused, but the Valyria, where the Targaryens actually came from originally. It was like this apparently like utopia that there was some sort of what was it, the fall or the doom of Valyria, where the name, the country the Valyrian steel is named after, where the dragons came from. We got like some references to it in Game of Thrones. It's much more, I shouldn't say prevalent, but they talk about it more in the novels. This seems like a ripe opportunity to maybe dive into what happened to Valyria that maybe that really sort of thrust the Targaryens to want to come to Westeros, even though that takes place quite a while before the events of House of the Dragon. I wonder if we might get some monologuing or some filled in history there. I'd be really curious to find out if there's something there. Just again, a fun lore thing that has not been fully fleshed out in the novels either, just sort of alluded to, and it's a big mystery. So I think that's probably my top one. All right, gentlemen, I think we're going to start to wind down the conversation here, which is just a couple more wrap-up questions. So first up, I have to ask the question: how are we feeling about Game of Thrones in general now that we are 3.5 years removed from it? I know I kind of alluded to that. I personally was not as down on it as others, but also not in love with it. I mean, we've had some time to sit back and reflect on the series. What are your thoughts on it as a whole? We'll start there. Daniel?
I still think, looking back, it's probably one of my favorite shows of all time still. I don't think that despite the ending not being maybe as 10 out of 10 as some of the rest of the series is, I still think that some of those, especially those early scenes like we talked about, seasons 1 through 4, are some of the best television I've ever seen. And I'm always going to, I'm a little biased. I guess we had this podcast, so it's always going to have a little bit of a special place in my heart because of that. So I think, while maybe they didn't stick the landing as well as I wanted them to, it'll always be one of the, greatest series that I've probably ever seen. It might not stay up there, there's always new shows coming out, but it'll always be towards the top, I think. Just given what it gave us, something that we had never seen before, really. So yeah.
Good thoughts there, Austin.
Yeah, I think it's a great series. When it came out, again, best television we'd ever seen. Its legacy to me is elevating television as a medium across the board. If it wasn't for Game of Thrones and that first season, I don't think we would get so many excellent TV series that have come out since. And I think that's really its most important contribution, more so than the story it told itself. It was kind of elevating television as a whole. I don't know if, because of that, I don't know if this new series can really live up to it in the end. We've had so many series try to, Star Wars, Marvel. You have lots of these like giant franchises that try to create sequels and prequels and things like that, and are never really able to recapture the magic of the original thing that made it great without diving heavily into a nostalgia. So I'm hoping they don't go down that road. And I'm hoping they're able to tell a new story and once again bring that level of excellence that kind of gave Game of Thrones the legacy that it has.
Yeah, no, I'd agree, Austin, with what your thoughts are. For me personally, frankly, I'm just gonna throw this out there. I have forged lifelong friendships through Game of Thrones. I've my friendships with you guys grew much closer thanks to Game of Thrones. Frankly, I'm not here to toot horn, but I got a job because I did Game of Thrones podcast, which has led to a career, which I'm very thankful for. It's funny because it's a TV show, and there's no way House of the Dragon is going to be able to give me that same thing. So I'm trying really hard not to expect that and put that sort of burden on this show. What I'm hoping for is a show that is sort of rekindling what I liked about the early seasons. That's people in rooms, sort of the monologuing. Some of my favorite scenes, in fact, from season 1 are the scenes where it's just two people in a room talking. You have scenes between Robert and Cersei, Baelish and people, and you just get so much. You learn so much about the characters and the motivations and sort of the stakes that way, in a way that I find more compelling than even the big battle sequences. I want more of that. That's what I'm hoping, that we can have that level of writing and production value brought to the forefront. And I hope it can help continue to elevate television, Austin, because I think you're right. I think I've mentioned Westworld already. The fact that Amazon was willing to drop that insane amount of money to both buy the right to and produce one season of Lord of the Rings is absolutely insane. And I can tell you the reason why is because it's on the record. Jeff Bezos at one point literally said, "I want my Game of Thrones." He literally said that. And that's why we've gotten the wheel.
Look at these billionaires being so charitable to us, giving us new series.
Oh, yes.
They're so kind and generous.
Also, did you know it's really easy to just get another Game of Thrones? You just throw enough money at it, it'll happen, right?
Yeah, it's no problem. It's worked with so many movies, and just dump money into it and it'll be good.
I will say, though, it's that it did breed that sort of competition. HBO on its own, again, we get shows like Westworld, which is great. But even, gosh, there's been an explosion of content. Do we get Stranger Things if it's not for Game of Thrones? I actually don't think we do. I don't think Netflix invests quite as much money in its series. I don't think we get the Witcher TV show, for example. You're right. Game of Thrones changed the game. The other thing that I think is going to be, again, I want to make sure I don't put this expectation on House of the Dragon, is I truthfully believe Game of Thrones may be one of the very last series that collectively we as a first world culture experience together, because Game of Thrones came out in 2011, right before the explosion of streaming and multiple streaming services. And there was quite a bit less content. I know it's kind of hard to imagine now. There's infinite amount of content to consume, and I'd say content like TV shows, movies. But back at the time, it was still manageable. I remember when Netflix put out House of Cards and Orange is the New Black, I was like, oh, I'm going to watch every Netflix original and stay on top of it. And that's just not the case anymore. So I don't think Game of Thrones is going to be able to recapture that level of popularity. But in my mind, that could be a benefit, because then they don't have to worry about trying to appease everyone with big battle sequences, and they can just focus on what they're good at. That's my hope. That's my goal. Daniel, do you think House of the Dragon can recapture what made Game of Thrones so great?
I think that's way too high of an expectation for the show to have. I think that, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, I really don't want it to be, let's make Game of Thrones 2.0, or I would rather them to have more different goals. I would want them to be doing something different and telling a different style story. Yes, I think it needs to make sense with the context of the show and exist in the world of Game of Thrones, but I would much rather see and sort of like what you're saying, I think elements of the show can be similar, like them talking in a room and the intense dialogue and stuff like that makes sense. But instead of trying to make a Game of Thrones, I want them to just tell the story that they want to tell in their own way, and I'd probably enjoy the show a lot more that way. So that would be sort of my idea. Don't try to recapture the Game of Thrones. Just be creative and come up with something new. Maybe we haven't seen before, and that doesn't necessarily mean spending a certain amount of money. It just telling the story that you want to tell in a creative way. I think that's the goal that I would want for this show.
Well, I think it's going to take me right into just, a little bit of a tease. I couldn't find a synopsis for the first episode of the first season of House of the Dragon, but the title of the first episode is The Heirs of the Dragon. So I'll tell you what I think about this, and I want to hear what you guys think. Either of you guys watch Succession, the HBO show? No. It's amazing. Nope. You should watch it. Believe the hype. It gets all the Emmy love. It's that good. It's amazing. I actually think this show is going to be Succession, but Game of Thrones, and I am totally cool with it. So those of you who aren't familiar with Succession, it is a fictional show that is heavily inspired by the Murdoch family, aka the owners of Fox News. And essentially you have this sort of the family that what would you call it? The alpha male of the family who built the whole company from the ground up and, put his blood, sweat, and tears and all that. And he's kind of an asshole. He's at the end of his life and his kids are all like, oh my gosh, dad's going to die soon. Who's going to get the biggest piece of the pie? And they're all trying to win his love and affection. And he knows that and uses that against them. And he actually pits the kids against each other. It's amazing. It's great writing, great TV, great.
It's like angry Arrested Development.
Yes. And here's the thing. It sounds dark, and it is. It has a lot of drama, but it is genuinely a darkly hilarious show. I probably laugh watching Succession more than I do any other show right now. It feels like when you look at the premise of this series, it's going to be Succession, but in Game of Thrones, and I'm totally here for it. With that said, Austin, the Heirs of the Dragon, what do you think? Any guesses to what we can expect to see?
Yeah, I think it's just going to be it's first episode, right? So we're going to introduce the major characters. We're going to introduce the problem, and we're going to introduce some kind of plot twist at the end to hook people into watching the next episode. It's going to be the king getting old. He needs to select an heir. He's supposed to pick one person. He's thinking about picking another, and everyone's really upset. That was the pitch when they walked into HBO. And they were like, this is what we're doing.
Hey, Austin, what if we, instead of betting on shoes, went and pitched our own Game of Thrones series? Because you just made it sound pretty easy.
It's really simple. I don't understand. You want $35 million? I bet we could get it pretty easy.
I'm on board. I'll make some calls. Austin's going to be the pitch man. All right, Daniel, any guesses on your end about what we can expect to see?
I mean, dragons, right? No, I think that, like Austin said, we're going to have an introduction to some of the more important characters. And I do think that we'll probably get some of those referential pieces of talking about other houses and just teasing that they will come for the Game of Thrones fans to stick around. They may mention, the Stark, blah, 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 or, whatever, something like that. I think we'll get some of those pieces just to get those people in and settled in and wanting to stick around a little bit. But yeah, it'll be a pretty, I expect, just a pretty generic sort of pilot, I guess, with a Game of Thrones flair. So,
all right, good deal. Last thing I'm going to say, and this is a little bit of recency bias, but I forgot to mention it earlier. And it relates to what I hope for the series. So Succession, but Game of Thrones. This is also a prequel series, technically. And Daniel, you and I just finished watching earlier tonight the series finale for Better Call Saul, which is the Breaking Bad sort of spinoff that is mostly a prequel. And all I can say is I hope that the writers of this show were watching Better Call Saul and taking notes on how to do a prequel. And what I mean is, what makes a compelling prequel? It's not how did Han Solo get his blaster? How did Chewie get his nickname? I don't really care about that. That's not interesting. I don't want someone to connect dots that I already kind of imagine better in my head for me, right? What I think could be compelling, I hope they take the notes from Better Call Saul, which is you already know where this story's going, right? The question is, how do we get there? And within that, how do we get there? How can you invent and write and create real moments of dramatic tension? That's what Better Call Saul did incredibly well by introducing characters where you're like, I have no idea how this character ends up. I wonder what they're going to do with this person. Or, hey, I know this person's going to do this, but he's doing this opposite thing. Well, how is he going to go from here to here? What's going to be that journey? That's the kind of thing I find compelling personally.
give me information I didn't know I wanted.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, I think that is all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Real quick, for those of us who are still using social media, Daniel Stull, if you're still using social media, where can people find you on their socials?
I'm basically not using social media anymore. I've deleted most of them. However, if people wanted to reach out, I technically still have a Twitter that I have not used in, I don't know, maybe a year. At Daniel Stull 23, I think it is. I don't even remember my own handle at this point. I think that's what it is. So that's where you can find me.
All right, and Austin Lucari. Austin, do you even have a social media anymore?
I have deleted everything, but if you want to let me know what you think about my stupid opinions, you should leave a review on this podcast. Let us know.
That is great. You can leave those reviews on Apple Podcasts specifically. You can email us at thecastbeyondthewall@live.com. That's castbeyondthewall@live.com. But definitely leave us a review. In fact, that would be the preferred methodology for any form of feedback or opinions or theories you have. Go to Apple Podcasts. Give us a rating. Tell us we're awesome. 5 stars preferred. If you think Austin sucks, give us 1 star. And tell us why. That would be great. If for some reason you want to keep up with my opinions, which are mostly just movie reactions, sometimes TV, sometimes video games, you can find me on Twitter, tweeting all the things, sending the Ravens at CMasters Talk. That is letter C Masters Talk. You can also find the Cast Beyond the Wall. We will be promoting when new episodes go live for those of you who are not subscribed to the podcast, which, by the way, not only do you leave a review on Apple or Spotify, you follow or you subscribe, have the episodes delivered directly to your listening ears the moment they're available. But you can also find out when new episodes go live on Facebook at facebook.com/the Cast Beyond the Wall or on Twitter at cast_beyond_GOT. Ladies and gentlemen, that is all we have time for today. Daniel, Austin, it's been great seeing you guys again. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been fun. I'm excited to get the show on the road.
Absolutely. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to our House of the Dragon Season 1 preview. Join us next week when we continue our journey, once again, going beyond the wall.
The realm will ever accept me as their queen.
A woman would not inherit the Iron Throne.
Because that is the order of things. When I'm queen, I will create a new order.
Your family has dragons.
There are power men should never have trifled with.
If Rhaenyra comes into power, she could cut off any challenge to her succession.
I am to inherit the Iron Throne. She will block my way.
Our hearts remain as one.
Oh, our hearts were never one. Have you never imagined yourself on the Iron